Okay, I think we're ready to begin now with our first presentation of the morning with Dr. Mike Savarese.
Everybody, can you hear me okay without the microphone? Sure. Good, because it's almost a good job. Anyway, I'm so pleased to be talking to you today, and I'm pleased to be participating in this conference, and I really did enjoy the panel discussion, and it has me rethinking most of what's in this talk, so hopefully I don't get too distracted with last-minute thoughts. But today I really want to talk to you about a package of vulnerability assessment tools that were developed specifically for Collier County to look at the impact of sea level rise and storm surge. This tool is already being employed, it's being updated, and it's being expanded to cover a wider geographic scope. I need to acknowledge my co-author here, Peter Sheng. He's really the brains behind our partnership. He's the person at University of Florida that actually developed the tool. And I've been sort of a practitioner, user, and minister of the tool, helping communities appreciate it and use it in effective ways. There are obviously a lot of climate change effects that are impacting the globe. Warmer temperature, droughts and floods, wildfires, sea level rise, storminess. The conversation we had just a few minutes ago made me realize how negligent we are on vulnerability to warmer temperatures. This particular tool package, though, was specifically designed with dealing with seawater inundation caused by rising tides because of sea level rise and increased storminess, increasing storm surge. And for coastal communities, maybe the Seminole tribe, at least the Big Cypress geographic realm, is less concerned with that, and there are other drivers that are important. But for a good deal of coastal Florida, obviously sea level rise and storminess are of the highest priority. And really, this is about how a community can improve its resilience to those factors. So what I'm going to show you is basically a methodology and a tool, and talk to you a little bit about how it's been employed. And then a couple of talks from now, Rachel Kangas is going to talk more specifically about how this particular tool has been applied to dealing with cultural resources in Collier County. Sea level rise, how fast, how fast does it go up? How high does it go up? Is a point of contention. And what you're seeing here on this graph are the NOAA 2017 curves. These are the sea level curves that were published by the agency in 2017. And then over in the table, you can see are the kinds of planning horizons, 2030, 2060, 2100, and the sea level rise magnitudes in feet that the tool that I'm going to introduce to you in a moment called ACUNE actually employ. And you can see from the graph, you can be dealing with a sea level rise that might be as high as, I don't know, I can't see it in feet, 8.5 feet, to perhaps as little as just a couple of feet in 2100. And where we traject on those curves has a lot to do with how society manages its greenhouse gases. So for that reason, there's a lot of ambiguity as to which path we're riding along. Just a couple of months ago, NOAA published in a 2022 report by using empirical data for our region that's actually looked at tide gauge changes over time, noted that given what we've seen between 2000 and 2022, we're following the NOAA intermediate high or the NOAA high curve, which is analogous to what you see in the red boxes in that table. So if we continue to follow the curve we're presently on, we can expect these kinds of extreme sea level rise intensities as we move forward. What are the consequences of that? Well, this is a phenomenon you're no doubt familiar with, sometimes called chronic inundation or nuisance flooding. This is where the highest high tides, at least a couple of times a month, sort of invade the landscape and create a nuisance. Here you can see a road that's being impacted, a road to Goodland. And here you can see on the right is a Calusa mound in Rookery Bay that was flooded in an extreme high tide back in September. These are the kinds of phenomena that are going to become more numerous, more geographically extensive, and deeper as we move forward in time. The second, with a warming climate and with rising sea level comes greater fueling capacity for tropical storms and hurricanes. So with climate change and global warming, we can expect warmer oceans, more intense storms that are wetter, larger, and fuel more quickly and actually travel more slowly. This is a satellite scene back in Irma days in 2017, where we had a number of tropical storms and hurricanes on the landscape. And the last decade or so, at the very least, we've seen how quickly storms can fuel and go from a mere tropical storm to a major category storm. We can also see how large and slow moving they can be when you look at storms like Harvey impacting Houston, or if you look at Dorian impacting the Bahamas that just sat on the landscape for long periods of time. Now, the problem with stormier storms and slower moving storms is a capacity for greater storm surge. And if you put storm surge on top of what's already a higher sea level, the inundation capacity of the storm becomes much greater. This is the aftermath seen after Hurricane Irma struck Everglades City in 2017. And so the devastation capacity for these stormier storms as sea level goes up becomes greater and greater. I showed this slide at a talk a few weeks ago, and someone in the audience had noticed, and I had never noticed it before in this picture, that the person that whose home has obviously been destroyed and has put all that wreckage out on the curb was conscientious enough to put out their recycling bin. That's the limited green cans. That just talk about, irony. Just kind of blows my mind, literally and figuratively. So storm surge becomes more serious. Now, what's at stake? Resources of all kinds. And depending upon what your community values, maybe one of these flavors of resources is more important than others. Obviously, given the interest in the room, it's cultural resources that you're most interested in. And after listening to the conversation of the panel, it struck home to me quite deeply that for Native Americans, for the Seminole tribe and other tribes sitting on our landscape, it's not only the tangible, intrinsically valuable things that are important, but it's the history and cultural heritage that those things represent. And one of the things I was hoping to say in the conversation, but didn't have a chance to, I think it's important to look at how vulnerability assessments are done for cultural resources, because again, it's not just about the assets, the tangibles, but their cultural and historical value. And I think it requires a rethinking how vulnerability is actually done in those types of communities. This is kind of a roadmap to show you how climate change preparedness is supposed to run. I would argue that maybe this roadmap is a little different if you're dealing with cultural resources. But in essence, it works something like this. You have to contextualize the problem and get your community involved and engaged. That's the educational portion that Juan spoke so deeply about during the panel. It's then about doing a vulnerability assessment, developing the tools, employing the tools to see when and where you're vulnerable to changes as you move forward in the future. And then you take that information and use it in useful ways, and you develop adaptation strategies and priorities, and then you implement those strategies, you spend some money, and hopefully you make your resources more resilient to those kinds of vulnerabilities. Now, when you look at this as a roadmap, this roadmap is just about treating the symptoms of climate change. Okay? We're basically saying, oh, crap, we just have to accept what comes our way, and we're going to have to adapt. That's what the word adapt means. That's what the word resilience means, okay? But there's also an opportunity to treat the causes of the problem, the causes of disease, and that deals with mitigation and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Most communities, local communities, because they're small and feel like they can't be powerful enough to influence the causes and mitigation, they're more focused on adaptation. And I think you'll find that in the context of this conference, we're talking more about adaptation and less about mitigation. But it's important to recognize that, with mitigation comes less vulnerability and less consequence that you have to adapt to. So, and what this particular talk is about, it's really about the vulnerability assessment tool. So I'm really just spending some time with you here at Stop 2. And then Rachel in a few minutes is going to talk to you a little bit about how Stop 2 can merge and send you on your way to Stop 3 on this road for cultural resources specifically. The tool package is known as ACUNE. It's a horrible acronym. I was not responsible for its name. Don't like it. Every time I speak the word, I have to remember what it stands for. So I have to write it down. It's Adaptation of Coastal, Urban, and Natural Ecosystems. And it's essentially a web-based assessment tool. It's a highly robust, highly complicated family of computer models that consider all kinds of processes that are not worth going into during this particular presentation. But suffice it to say, it accounts for the genuine attenuation capacities of the landscape. By that I mean, it really does a good job of reflecting how well the landscape can be at inhibiting the flow. Many models that are used are so-called bathtub models. If sea level is up 2 meters, well then anything that's 2 meters or lower in topography would then be shown as flooding. Nature doesn't work that way. The other thing is it deals with not only sea level rise, but also wave processes, storm surge processes, and it considers, again, natural resources and how well they do at attenuating flood. You can use this in nuisance flooding mode. You can use this in storm mode. It's also coupled with one of FEMA's economic damage modeling programs called ASIS. So you can actually find a cost, material cost for certain consequences. And it's also being used now, at least in Collier County, as a rapid forecasting tool, which is kind of an application we had initially anticipated. Let me show you some examples of how this can be employed. I'm taking you into the heart of the city of Naples here. You can see the airport located there in the upper right, and you can see the Gordon River moving from south to north, bottom to top. And what you're looking at here is a situation in the future, in 2060. This assumes a medium sea level rise magnitude is realized, about 1.8 feet higher, okay? And this is the area within this particular geographic region that's likely to be inundated 2 times a month due to nuisance flooding. And the depths are color-coded. The depths are in feet. You can see the greens are, I don't know, between 4 and 6 feet in depth. The blues are a little shallower, between 1 and 3 feet depth. And you can see if you're the manager of that airport, if you're part of the airport authority, you've got something to worry about under these situations. And then this can be used to develop some sort of adaptation strategy to deal with that problem. Here's another example. The city of Marco Island is very interested in their evacuation routes. Within this package, we have all kinds of assets that are mapped. You can see the major evacuation roadways highlighted in blue, leaving Marco Island, one to the east and one to the north. This is a situation in 2060 with 1.77 feet of sea level rise and 1 in 100 annual exceedance probability storm, the 1 in 100 year storm impacting the landscape. And you can see under these circumstances, the inundation depths are remarkably deep, and those evacuation routes are not functional in this particular situation. Again, something that can be helpful when it comes to management and adaptation. And then last, I'll show you how you can look at properties and structures and determine their economic impact. This is annualized property costs in 2060 by a medium sea level rise and again a 100-year storm. And so you can actually get an assessment of what the financial impact is going to be of certain conditions as you move forward into the future. The great news, from my opinion, is that this ACUNE package, it's not just a tool that's sitting on a shelf. It's like a toolbox that never gets opened. It's not that way at all. Communities are genuinely using the tool. The city of Naples is using it for their stormwater management improvements, and they also have a vulnerability assessment they've done in the recent past that they're redoing using the tool. Everglades City is actually recomposing their comprehensive plan using ACUNE. We've got smaller organizations like the Naples Botanical Garden that are using it to revise their management plan. And then again, in a few minutes with Rachel, we'll hear about how FPAN is using it to prioritize the needs of cultural resources as we move forward in the future. I think I'm probably already out of time. So let me just show you a couple of quick pictures. Here is Everglades City, again, in the aftermath of the surge. Oh no, this is, excuse me, nuisance flooding in Everglades City. That's City Hall. I won't belabor this, but this is an example of how Naples is using it to understand the vulnerability in those red polygons, which are areas that have inadequate stormwater infrastructure. So they're going to make engineering improvements to the infrastructure in those areas. And then last but not least, I just wanted to mention that these kinds of tools are being brought to larger groups. Here you can see in yellow is the geographic map of what's known as the Southwest Florida Regional Resiliency Coalition. These are the member organizations, 3 counties, 10 cities, and the Seminole Tribe, as well as the Captiva Erosion Prevention District. And at the moment, ACUNE is just about ready to be released to be used for the entire region. And so the idea is to take these tools, put them in the hands of local government, or put them in the hands of these regional alliances so that they can be used more effectively. And that's it. Thank you.